everyone, and good evening. We want to thank you so much for coming to our panel discussion, Saving Higher Education from Cancel Culture, sponsored by the Legal Insurrection Foundation. One of the most common criticisms when someone is enduring being canceled or an attempt at being canceled is that, oh, well, you just can't take criticism. Well, it's not near that simple. It's far more nuanced and it's far more maniacal than that. Jonathan Browser defines it as something that has these 6 tenets. One is punitiveness. The second is deplatforming. Are campaigners attempting to prevent you from publishing your work, giving speeches, or attending meetings? The third is organization. Does criticism appear to be organized and targeted? The next is moral grandstanding. Is the tone of the discourse ad hominem, repetitive, ritualistic, posturing, accusatory, and outraged? Are people flattening distinctions, demonizing you, singing inflammatory labels, and engaging in moral one-upmanship? Are people ignoring what you actually say, talking about, but not to you? And then the last is truthiness, as he calls it. Are the things being said about you inaccurate? Do the people saying them not even seem to care about their veracity? Do they feel at liberty to distort your words, ignore corrections, and make false accusations?
The problem of cancel culture on campus is one of the more intractable problems we've faced with regard to free speech on campus in FIRE's 21 years. When I began at FIRE 17 years ago this week, and then for many years afterwards, students were by far the most reliable supporters of free speech on college campuses. And unfortunately, that has changed. And in the last few years, students have seemingly changed from a very pro-free speech constituency, realizing it's their rights, to one that, if you can judge by the most vocal of them, and I don't know that you can, is nearly as hostile to unfettered free speech on campus as are campus administrators. But in recent years, FIRE has received a total of around 1,000 case submissions through our website annually, where you can go and say my free speech has been violated. And in the single month following George Floyd's death, we received 280 submissions. So more than a quarter of our year's submissions in that single month, or average year. The vast majority of them having to do with students getting in some kind of trouble, whether or not official, for commenting on Floyd, Black Lives Matter, or related issues. And they're still coming in at a higher clip than normal and are actually speeding up again as schools are slowly starting to return to session. We do need a cultural shift in which people are given some room to be wrong, and where our first impulse is to try to convince our opponents rather than destroy them. I do think that if they don't stop doing it soon, there will be no saving our society from the really ugly ramifications of where this could go.
In recent years, and especially recent months, people inside the academy have, with frightening rapidity, persuaded a considerable segment of the populace that words are violence and need to be policed. Even more frightening is that these ideas have been coupled with violent actions and calls for defunding the actual non-metaphorical police. My fellow denizens in the ivory tower are waging a war, and it is no longer advisable for me to retreat fully into the stacks of Princeton's wonderful library. I only wish that I had spoken out sooner. Consider the newly dominant word anti-racism. It sounds attractive, but isn't. In fact, it is a Trojan horse for race-based discrimination of its own kind. I've had enough, and I penned a lone letter of dissent. I believed then, and I believe now, that what I wrote was measured, quite unlike the letter to which I was responding. Nonetheless, the backlash was fierce. The president of Princeton issued a personal denunciation. A good number of my colleagues wrote and said scurrilous things about me, and even some good has come from the presumptive cancellation. Free speech is a bedrock principle. If we cannot agree on this, then we are lost as a nation. That's an institutional comment. But then there's what's most important for the mental health of anyone who walks through a firestorm. You need friends and supporters, people who will criticize but not destroy you when you make a mistake, people who have your back when they believe you're right, though others seek to destroy you. It is depressing just how many friends I have lost, but obviously they weren't actually friends. Also depressing is just how many communications I have received from people, including prominent colleagues at Princeton, who say that they wish they could support me publicly, but alas, are afraid of what will happen to them if they do. Still, some people, friends old and new, have stepped up to the plate, and I will be forever especially grateful to them. The pressure to apologize in an effort to appease one's tormentors can be tremendous. But do not give in to the pressure. If you feel you did no wrong, do not apologize. The majority of Americans loathe cancel culture. It is time to stop being afraid to express over and over again and in as many public ways as possible our collective disgust at the shocking illiberalism that has taken over the minds of a highly vocal, often extraordinarily privileged minority of our citizens.
2019, I wrote an article in the Federalist called "The Right of Israel to Annex the West Bank and Beyond." Well, to cut a very, very long story short, all hell broke loose across DePaul campus. I received many death threats. But the most egregious thing that really happened to me was that, against the wishes of the university president, faculty council took it upon themselves to, in an illegal way, violating the university handbook, to censure me. And I was conducted to, I was asked to attend a racial sensitivity workshop, which I steadfastly refused to do. There was a boycott led by faculty and by students against all my classes, which I'm still undergoing. And there were calls to have me fired, dismissed from my job. I hired a very, shall I say, pit bull dog team of lawyers and engaged in a lawsuit against my university for defamatory claims. I did not attend the racial sensitivity workshop. I adhered to none of the demands that were met. Reiterate what Professor Katz said, that one does not capitulate 1 inch to the adversary. One does not apologize. One does not offer any kind of appeasement to one's adversaries when one knows that one has not in any way committed an egregious act or violated anyone's individual rights. What one is doing is exercising one's First Amendment. The boycotts against me continue. I've lost, like Professor Katz, I've lost all of my friends. I think I have 2 professors or 3 professors after having taught at the university for 20 years who are willing to speak to me. It's fine. I'm very, very non-sentimental by nature, and even more non-sentimental in the professional world, and have a long staying power. So I'm willing to fight this to the bitter end.
In early June of this year, I wrote 2 blog posts highly critical of the Black Lives Matter movement, saying that the Michael Brown narrative of hands up, don't shoot is false. It's a completely false, fabricated narrative. And the other thing was I was critical of the founding and the activists who were leading the movement, that they did not, and the rioting and the looting, that they did not have the country's interest in mind, and that they were seeking to tear down the country, not build it up. And of course, I think the last 3 months have completely vindicated me on that point. But what happened is people pretty much lost their minds. Now it came from within the building, and it came from within the Cornell community, whereas before that it had always been outside. 21 of my colleagues signed a letter denouncing me. Some of them I'd worked with for a decade. Some of them I considered friends. Not a single one of them approached me before the letter was published in the Cornell Sun. And although it didn't use my name, it was about me, and people within the building were told it was about me. I was denounced by the dean of the law school. I was also 15 student groups announced a boycott of my course and called upon all other students to boycott my course. By the way, the boycott failed. My course was oversubscribed. And that's because I have a lot of student support within the building. And throughout this, one of the things that really helped get me through it was not just hundreds and hundreds of emails from around the country once I went public with it, but a lot of emails from students who said that don't think these people speak for everybody, that you have a lot of support within the building. Just everybody is afraid to say anything. They don't want to become a target the way you have. And I think that's one of the big takeaways from what we call cancel culture, is that everybody who's on this panel has survived because we had job protection, whether tenure or something reasonably equivalent to tenure. But the damage from cancel culture is not to the people who are able to survive, who have a platform or job protection. It's to everybody else who doesn't have those benefits and those protections. They are scared into silence. One of the big pushbacks that I received was, well, you just don't like being criticized. I offered to publicly debate at the law school a representative of these student groups and a faculty member of their choice. So let's debate it. Let's put it on. Let's live stream it. That was rejected. This is not criticism. This is a power play. And what we're seeing go on campuses and in the culture more broadly is an exercise of power to prevent open debate of ideas. Cancel culture is really a symptom, in my mind, of a deeper problem within the universities, a uniformity of ideological viewpoint, which has created what I consider to be an academic death spiral. And it's a death spiral because now you're seeing pushback in the broader culture. I do think we are in a time, not of hypersensitivity, but where people view this as an opportunity to exert their power over these institutions. And that's exactly what's going on. I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. I think it's going to get a lot worse if Joe Biden wins the election, because that will be viewed as a vote of confidence in what is going on. So stay tuned.